actually get into what constitutes sin and the ideal mode of being. And like I said, what I've been trying to manage to do here is to extract it out of the religious context and to not just look at rules necessarily, but look at what is the most proper ideal mode of orienting and moving within the world itself. And then kind of correlating that data from what I can, what I extract out of that, and then correlating that with scripture and see how much it lines up together. And so far, for what I can tell on an ethical, moral standard, is that it lines up pretty well. So everybody focuses on rules and laws, but it's not necessarily that simple, I would say. It isn't to a certain extent, but the rules and laws of God that he has are more, I would say, guidelines in which we can move. And just like parents, I mean, we set up rules for our children, and then we give them the freedom to kind of almost, I would say, manipulate the rules to a certain extent, to see how creative they can actually be, and then to move through there and then get on to them whenever they, really begin to deliberately break a rule and cause chaos. But that's essentially what it is. You're moving about the world and you're trying to teeter between the two, chaos and order, constantly, because you don't want too much order, or life becomes too tyrannical and hampers creativity and suffocates you essentially. And then you don't want too much chaos, because then it gets, I would say, too creative, and then it begins to just deteriorate into oblivion, into the abyss. And so that's the interesting factor too, is people ask, well, why would God, put people in hell? Chooses to put people in hell instead people put themselves in hell. And we see that even here in this universe, in this life, people put themselves in hellacious situations all the time, deliberately sometimes, oftentimes. And they'll choose to do things that they know they shouldn't be doing, that guides them and into a situation of utter chaos. We see that with drug addicts and things. I'll get into that here shortly. To where not only do you make your life a living hell, but you make everyone else's a living hell as well. And so people guide themselves to hellacious situations oftentimes, not always. It can end up, somehow spontaneously becoming a hellacious situation. But if you actually pay attention and backtrack your own mode of behavior, I know I've done it with myself several times, and you see something that has spontaneously gone wrong, you can actually backtrack and oftentimes see where you went wrong multiple times that led to that catastrophe to begin with. And so you created your own hell. And that's essentially what this idea is about. And you see the same thing in Buddhism, which we'll get into here shortly. The ideas of the middle way and balancing and adapting between chaos and order as it manifests itself in reality, manifests itself to ourselves, to us. And you're constantly having to adapt between those obstacles and potentials that opportunities that come our way, and you have to orient yourself and act out properly in order for life to somewhat go correctly. And if you do it enough and you do it enough times, life begins to go pretty well. It's not that there's not going to be like cancer come into your life or something of that nature. There are catastrophes for sure that are out of our control. And that's where you really have to rely on God at that point more than ever before. Oftentimes we put ourselves in hellacious situations. That's the idea of sin. It's the idea of chaos and the deviation from the way, from the balanced path, the balanced mode of being in the world. You look at the yin yang symbol of Buddhism, you see the same thing. You see the chaos order dichotomy, and then you see the middle path, and you see the serpent-like pattern within that dichotomy. And what that represents is the process of adaptation. You're constantly adapting. And I mean, circumstances manifest themselves all the time. Just within a day or an hour, you can see that. I mean, unless you're doing absolutely nothing, and then maybe nothing will happen, nothing will present itself. But oftentimes you have things present themselves all the time as you go to work, as you go to school, as you do things with your family. I mean, things are always manifesting themselves, and you're having to deal with deal with those whether they're good things, you're having to contend and to work with those and to see how you can utilize it. If you're orienting yourself properly and you're acting properly in the world, and then those things kind of become more tool-like rather than obstacle-like,